Welcome back to Law and Crime. I'm Carissa Kranz, and I am here to carry you through the midday. Right now, we're going to go to our top trending stories of other crimes around the country. Let's take a look.
Here are today's top crime stories trending on lawandcrime.com and across the country. A former congressional candidate in Georgia who ran for office on a platform of responsible gun regulation is facing charges in the fatal shooting of her former campaign treasurer. Kelly Collins, who ran for Georgia's 10th congressional district in 2017, is accused of killing her former campaign treasurer, Curtis Kane, whose body was discovered in his South Carolina home. Ironically, Collins advocated for responsible gun regulation during her campaign. Collins is charged with murder and grand larceny. The man who investigators say is the Golden State Killer is facing an additional charge of murder. 72-year-old Joseph James Deangelo is now linked to at least a dozen murders and more than 50 rapes across California in the 1970s and 80s. The former police officer was arrested last month after investigators were able to link his DNA from a genealogical website to crimes tied to the elusive Golden State Killer. Deangelo remains in Sacramento County Jail and now faces 13 counts of first-degree murder. Police in Los Angeles released surveillance footage of an armed robbery of a taco truck. The suspects can be seen pistol whipping one of the employees of the Tacos El Gallozo truck as they tried to open a safe. The pistol-whipped employee required stitches but is expected to be okay. Police released a video with the hopes of identifying the three suspects. Those were today's top crime stories. I'm Anthony Velez for Law and Crime.
Okay, welcome back. I'm Carissa Kranz. Before we get into the main trial that we're covering today, let's talk for a minute about that last story we heard Anthony Velez report on, where the employee, look at it in that video, is pistol whipped in an armed robbery at a Taco Bell. With me is Latonia Hines. Latonia, when you are trying a case, isn't the best evidence video evidence like that, and does it get any better than that?
It doesn't get any better than that. And they didn't do anything to hide their faces. Their faces are very visible. It's better than eyewitness testimony when you have that video there.
Okay, right. And that was actually a taco truck, not a Taco Bell. But that is great. Talk about a truck and great video in a truck. I mean, the quality of that video is incredible. Do you expect that would be a plea, or do you think that would be tried?
Oh, I think that's going to be a plea. It should be a plea, depending on what the people's different criminal histories are. You know, that might determine whether or not you want to enter a plea, because it may not be that they can negotiate a very good sentencing if they have a really bad history.
I mean, and you can see there in the video live, you see the guy's face. He has his hood on, but it's not like he has a mask on right there. You can see he's holding him down. He has the gun in his hand. There's no question, if they find him, that there's an easy ID that could be ID'd again in the courtroom.
Right, and there's no ambiguity as to whether or not a crime happened. You actually see it. You see them pulling the gun, you see the person being held down, and you see the person being hit. So those elements are easily proved, and your ID with the video. So it's a very good case for the prosecution.
Okay, we are now going to switch back into one of the main trials that we're covering here at Law and Crime. It's the George Birch trial out of Wisconsin. He is accused of savagely beating and strangling and sexually assaulting and murdering a Green Bay, Wisconsin mother, Nicole, and the defendant, Birch, claims that it wasn't him, that it was actually her boyfriend. Right now on the stand is the boyfriend at the time, and he says, no, it wasn't me. But let's take a look at what he has to say and if he's believable and if the jury is going to believe him as well. That is direct examination of Doug Dietrich. That is the boyfriend of the victim. And this is important because during the prosecution's case, the prosecution is trying to lend credibility to his alibi, since the defense is planning to put the defendant on the stand and say he didn't do it, but the boyfriend did. With me, Latonia Hines, prosecutor. Do you feel, Latonia, that this is, you know, you hear the text messages back and forth. Obviously, they don't have a good relationship. Obviously, they're in a fight. Do you think the jury is taking that to be motive for murder, or is the prosecution just getting it out now to establish that they have nothing to hide? Oh, I think we might be having some...
Yes, get the information out.
Are we having some technical difficulties?
I hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you now. Did you get my question?
I'm sorry, but can you just repeat the last part of it, please?
Do you think that the text messages that they were sharing back and forth in front of the jury, which showed that there was some tension between the victim and the boyfriend that night, lends credibility to the prosecution's case or the defense's defense argument?
Well, I think you get all the information out there to the prosecutor, even if it's bad in the beginning for you, so that it looks like they're going backwards and forwards and that things aren't very happy. But you want to get that information out there so you don't have the defense using that to say he had a motive. So you get the information out there. And so it's going to be up to the prosecution to, show that this isn't that significant. And let's look at the main reason why we're here, because the defendant that is on trial is the person who killed her.
Right. And also one thing that we are expecting to hear is that the Fitbit that the boyfriend was wearing does take away any credibility to the defense case that the boyfriend was actually the one that caused the murder. But we're going to watch this. We're going to cover this. But first, we must go to a quick break. So stick with us and we will be right back. Okay, so that's the defendant herself in the jailhouse speaking on camera. She reached out to reporters to talk about a marriage that she wanted to have, and she felt like the jailhouse and the system would retaliate against her and not allow her to get married and honor her love. The question is the following, and I have Latonia Hines with me. She is a prosecutor now. I have two questions. One, can she get a fair trial? And two, was her marriage a hoax for her to get more media attention in order for her to further prove her case that it's just impossible to get a fair trial in Kentucky? Which goes to the ultimate bottom line question is, can she get a fair trial in Kentucky?
There has been a lot of media coverage of this case, and so that always determines whether or not somebody can get a fair trial. But I believe she can get a fair trial. The judge will go through all of the different motions that the defense will make about having concerns about the fair trial. They'll do another jury selection and go through that process. Right now, she hasn't given enough legally to show why she wouldn't be able to get a fair trial. You have to see what happens as you start doing jury selection again. Now, as for the marriage part of it, she seems a bit like Jodi Arias, somebody who likes to have some media attention and bring the media back. So if you don't want the media to be involved or showing your case, you probably wouldn't be giving jailhouse interviews. And so I don't know where her counsel is in this, because even when I was a past defense counsel for a short period of time, I would advise you never do a jailhouse interview while you still have a case pending.
Right. So, and a couple of things, that the courtroom is taking precautions in this case by not allowing our live cameras in there. I think that's their way of trying to preserve a fair trial. We do have Aaron Keller in the courtroom covering it with us, but we can't even show what happened in the courtroom until, it has already happened in that case. So I think that the courtroom is taking enough precautions in order to try to preserve the right to a fair trial. Also, I'd like your thoughts on the fact that this has been a national case. So just because it's garnered media attention, I'm not sure that it matters whether it's tried in Kentucky or elsewhere. I mean, this is a case that had at least 2 segments on 48 Hours, among other news media outlets. So do you think it really matters if it's Kentucky or elsewhere when it's getting national attention?
So it may not necessarily matter that it's in Kentucky or elsewhere, but what does matter is how much do the individual jurors who are being selected for this case know about this case? Do they know her specifically? Do they know enough facts about it that they've already judged the case and would not be able to be unbiased? And that's the concern here. But you're correct. This case has already made a lot of national news. And so the idea of just moving it someplace else doesn't mean that you would find somebody who hadn't heard anything. The question is, have they heard something and they've already judged the case?
Okay, well, we're going to continue to monitor this trial, among others, here on Law&Crime. And right now, we're going to jump back to the case we were following earlier today. It is the case with George Burch. And this is the case where the defendant is on trial for murder, strangulation, sexual assault of Nicole and the victim. The boyfriend took the stand earlier today. The prosecution is saying the defendant did it. The defendant is saying the boyfriend did it. Right now, we're going to listen to testimony from Dallas Kennedy. This is the babysitter, to see how she helps the prosecution's case. Let's take a look. Okay, that's testimony from Dallas Kennedy, the babysitter in the case of George Birch when Nicole went missing. She was talking about how she spoke to the boyfriend, who we heard from earlier today, Doug Dietrich. With me, Latonia Hines. Latonia, how do you think the jury is taking the babysitter's testimony as to the boyfriend's culpability and involvement in this case?
Well, they're going to have to take everything all together. She seemed to be a credible witness. She's going back through what was in her mind at the time. What's interesting, and I think the jury's going to have to listen to it and wonder to themselves, she said she was a bit put off by what he was saying to her, that she was a little bit scared. And the question is, why would she feel scared? What was it about him or that night that made her feel scared? And I think that's going to be interesting. It'll be up to the defense, though, to actually play upon that, to make the jury have that doubt as to the fact that their client was the person who actually killed her.
I also think another comment that was said is that Doug told her that she hit her head that night. I'm not sure. I would like for the defense to follow up on that, because I'm not sure why that came out of his mouth or where they were going with that. Did you connect any dots there, or is that still yet to be seen?
I think it's still yet to be seen, and I think she also said it. She said that it was just a statement that he said, but she wasn't quite sure how that context came into play.
Okay.
She said
we have to go to a quick break, so hold that thought, but I agree, it's yet to be seen. Stick with us. We'll be right back after these few moments. Okay, so that is Edward Jackson, and that is a prosecution witness, but a friend of the defendant. And this witness is key because we're just listening to him testify that when the news broke about Nicole and her body, that this witness made a comment and was watching the television set with the defendant, and that the defendant basically had no reaction. He also said that he didn't notice any bruising on the body. And now here we are, Latonia Hines, and I want to discuss this with you. What are your takeaway points on this? And that's key for the jury to hear.
Well, it's key for the jury because the idea that he didn't have a reaction.
Right, which is very different than what we heard earlier today with the boyfriend, when we heard the investigator said that the boyfriend had a very normal reaction, was very emotional, cried, and this guy we just heard had zero reaction. And we know he was there. There's no question that he was involved. The question is what was his involvement?
Right. So here's the other thing that you've got to work with if you're the prosecutor, because the jury, and this is where the defense is going to play with this, there are no contusions. According to this witness who was sitting right next to him, he didn't see any abrasions or anything like that on the defendant. Well, on some levels, that's good for the defense. If that's the case, there's nothing to show that he was in any type of scuffle or anything like that. And knowing from how, unfortunately, she died, this was a really, really kind of brutal death. So you would think that you would see some evidence of this on him. So that's a little bit of problematic for the prosecution, but at the same time, the prosecution will have to go through the fact that this is a friend of his. He may have, maybe not consciously, but may want to unconsciously protect his friend.
Also, when you look at the size of him versus the size of her, it's not unlikely that someone that much larger could just be that much stronger and walk away with very little abrasions. But
Exactly.
Nonetheless, there's a lot of speculation. We're going to continue following this trial. The prosecution is still building its case. And right now we're going to listen to Tyler Belling. He's a computer forensic crime analysis, and this is a prosecution witness. Let's take a look. That is a prosecution witness in the George Birch trial. It's a computer forensic crime analysis. And what that crime analysis is saying, this is Tyler Belling, is that it's consistent with the defendant's movements and story in the body that he was everywhere she was and where he said he would be. However, it doesn't really poke holes into the defendant's argument that he's not denying that he wasn't there and that he wasn't with her. He's saying that he didn't do it, that the boyfriend showed up, and that the boyfriend then made them both victims. With me, Latonia Hines. Latonia, do you see what I'm saying with that? What's your conclusion with this prosecution's witness?
So I totally understand what you're saying. It on some levels bolsters his story that he was in those spaces and places, but it doesn't go to the crux of what he's saying, which is saying the prosecution proving that just because he was in those spaces and places, he was the person who actually did the killing. But it's very important for prosecutors to get the information out there because jurors love technological information. And so they still are going to have to do the nexus of saying, yes, he's in those spaces and places, but he's actually the one who did it. There is a red herring about the boyfriend. The boyfriend is not a factor here.
So hopefully the jurors can parse through the testimony the way you and I can and can say, wait a minute, the issue isn't whether or not he was there. The issue is whether or not he did the actual killing, which is what you and I just fleshed out. Right now we're going to listen to testimony from the defendant himself on the stand. And this is important because this is his side of the story. And this is what the jurors are going to hear. Let's take a look. Thank you, Anthony. We can always count on Anthony Velez to give us the most outrageous top crime stories. And that last one with the taco truck was, wow. We caught that whole thing on video, no ski masks, pistol whipping the victim who then had stitches. And with me, Latonia Hines. Latonia, before when we discussed this case, we were saying how video evidence is the best evidence. In this case, how can there even be a case of defense with what we just saw on that video?
I mean, there's always a defense. That's the reason why we have defense attorneys.
So you're a former criminal defense attorney. What would your defense be? Give it your best shot.
Well, here's the thing. The main thing is having the video. It's not a set deal that it's going to get introduced. I would ask for that video to be suppressed, and you would have to try to figure out ways to figure out legally how that video could be suppressed. Did they get it properly? Do they have a proper foundation for being able to even introduce the video? So as a defense attorney, you're going to have to try to refute the video and not let it get in. Just because the world is watching it doesn't mean that the prosecution's entitled to use it at trial if they can't get it in because it's been suppressed.
So that's why you're probably a great prosecutor, because you were a criminal defense attorney, so you can wear both sides of the hat. And as a criminal defense attorney, your probably only hope on this case is to try to get that video thrown out on a technicality. Just like any search and seizure in a house, having a bad search and getting everything thrown out when you know they're guilty because everything you found, but you're able to get the whole thing thrown out on a technicality. There's the video you could see here. Pretty much they're just in hoods, no ski masks. Their faces are shown. You see everything that they do. They probably figured in a truck that it just wouldn't be caught on such clear, candid camera, but everything is there, and that would be an easy ID for a courtroom. Okay, we're going to switch gears again. We're going to go back to the other trial we've been covering, the Wisconsin case, George Birch. Before the break, the defendant himself was taking the stand in his own defense, which we don't see a lot of because that opens a can of worms for cross-examinations. But right now, the defendant is taking the stand, and he is telling his side of the story of why he's saying he's innocent. He did not kill her. He did not kill Nicole. That actually the boyfriend did. And as a matter of procedure, the defendant had to take the stand to make that narrative argument. Otherwise, that's the only way to get those kind of facts and evidence, because the boyfriend is not a suspect. Let's take a look. That is George Birch, the defendant himself, on direct examination on the defense's case. He took the stand. And right now we can hear him talk, setting up his posture, posturing himself, his background. He's new to town. He seems like a pretty likable guy, a pretty decent guy. So far, so good for the defense. With me, Latonia Hines. Latonia, I know you're going to have to go for the day, and you're running out of time with us. I want to give you some opportunity to give us some final thoughts as we continue to watch his examination, and maybe what we should look for as the trial goes forward.
You're going to look for a change in demeanor and see if you see that happen, especially when the prosecution has time to start asking him questions. Right now, he's gone over this over and over again with his defense attorneys, and so it's coming out and it's flowing pretty well and setting this up. And what they're trying to show him as is kind of like a gentle giant. That's the reason why he's explained why he's called Big Country, trying to make him seem not as intimidating as he might have actually been to her on that night. So that's what you're going to hear, but it's going to be interesting to see how he handles cross-examination. There's only so much a defense attorney can do to protect you at that point in time. It's going to be about how consistent you've been all throughout this time when you were asked questions and how you handled the cross-examination. Right now, he's looking the way he should in the defense part of the case. He's looking pretty calm, collected, and it sounds kind of rehearsed, especially when you start hearing about where the parking lot and all that's been, because he's gone over it over and over again.
All right, so Latonia, thank you. That's a really good analysis. We have to go to a quick break, and I need to let you go. So thanks for joining us, and everybody else, stay tuned. We'll be right back after this quick break.